We're going to have a bit of I guess, kind of a hodgepodge of things related to women in Pesach, but hopefully it'll be like movements of a symphony that all fit together into something at the end. Hopefully, we'll see. Okay, so let's start with the following. There are three mitzvahs, the Rabban of Pirsume Nisa, of publicizing a nes. Right? Those are Ner Chanukah, Mikra Megillah with the associated mitzvahs along with Megillah, Matanos Levyonim and Mishloach Monos, and the last is Arba Kosos, the 4 cups of wine on Pesach. Now, if you look at the way those mitzvahs are constructed, those are what's called mitzvahs aseh shazman groma, positive time-dependent commandments. Now, in general, in the Torah, women are exempt from positive time-dependent mitzvahs. Okay? Leave it to the side. You can bother Mr. Kubowitz about it sometime if he wants to talk. But we're taking that as an axiom. However, those 3 mitzvahs that I just listed, as you've experienced for years, women are obligated. The Chachamim decided to go against the usual template, so to speak, of the Torah in terms of who's obligated for the mitzvah, and actually obligate the women in these mitzvahs. Okay, they're not easy in a women's schedule, right? On Purim to have to hear Megillah twice, all these things, some of them could be challenging. Now, why did they do it? We know that in general there's a principle that the Chachamim ke'ein d'oraisa tiknu, that when the Chachamim design something, they do it in the same way that the Torah does. Why did they go different? So here's the famous principle that the Gemara brings down, af hein hayu ba'osanes, because the women were also in the same miracle. Okay, now there's 2 approaches in the Rishonim as to how to explain that. One is, the one that kind of seems to be the more simple reading, is that the women were ba'osa sakona, they were in the same danger. Each of those things saved us from a dangerous situation. The slavery in Egypt, the dangers from Greece and Chanukah, and Haman who wanted to kill men, women, and child. The other approach is that the nes came about al yedei isha, through a woman. Okay, easiest one is Purim, Esther. Chanukah is the somewhat mysterious character of Yehudis. Pesach is strange because it's kind of very vague in general. And that's the statement that Chazal said, B'schus noshim tzidkonios nigo alav v'seinu mitzrayim. And the merit of the righteous women, our forefathers were saved from Egypt. So the question is, who are these righteous women and what did they do? I'll just point out for a second, if you ever go into a Jewish bookstore that's not so frum, you can find all sorts of kooky Haggadahs that are out there. They're interesting ones. There was one called the Freedom Haggadah, which interspersed the story of Martin Luther King with the story of the Jews coming up from Egypt, and instead of finishing with Chad Gadya, you finish with We Shall Overcome. It was interesting. So there's a Haggadah out there called the Women's Haggadah, right? And the thesis behind it is that the male chauvinist piggies who wrote our Haggadah left out all of the women who were central to the story. No Miriam, no Yocheved, nothing like that. So they rewrote the Haggadah to focus on them. My response to that is we have to write now a Moshe Rabbeinu Haggadah, because it's famous that Moshe Rabbeinu doesn't appear in the Haggadah, right? Because the Haggadah really is all about Ani v'lo malach, Ani v'lo saraf, Ani Hashem. It's only between us and Hashem. There's actually a prop as well. This, a woman who was a conservative Jew, what she calls, opened my eyes to this. She was surprised that I never knew about a Miriam's cup. There's a prop for your Seder table. If you look it up, it's a cup in silver with the image of a woman on there, and you're supposed to have that on your Seder table, again, to include Miriam, who's gotten written out of history. Okay, so we have all these things. The Ma'aseh Chazal are telling us, it was in the merit of women, right, that the Geula came. So what did they do? We have a few Midrashim and Gemaras that describe what they did. The Gemara in Maseches Sota tells us the following. It says, right, Dorash Rav Avira, he says, in the merit of these righteous women that were in that generation, we were redeemed. When the women would go to draw water, presumably from the Nile, HaKadosh Baruch Hu arranged that they would pull out their bucket of water, there would be little fish in there, sardines or such. V'shavos mechza mayim mechza dogim. So you'd get a bucket of half water, half fish. Shovtos stei kederos. They would then cook up 2 pots, one of hot water, one of chamin, one of fish. They would bring them to their husbands who were slaving in the sadeh, in the field, and they would wash them off with the hot water. And they would put oil on them to help them feel better. And they would give them fish to eat. And they would give them to drink. And this brought up the hopes of the men who were despondent and didn't want to have children. As we saw in the story of Miriam and Amram, right, that she chastised her father Amram for not wanting to have children, which on one hand was kind of a logical thing. The slavery went on for 210 years. So you had people who were born in slavery, died in slavery. The idea of bringing a child into that slavery is something that's very difficult. And it was the men who broke under that pressure, and it was the women who somehow were mechazik them. Now, there's a very strange way in which the women were mechazik the men. This is brought in Rashi in last week's parsha, and we'll fill it out from the source in the Medrash Tanchuma. And this has to do with the maros hatzovos, the copper mirrors. Okay, it says that the kir was built. Vayas akir nechoshes. The kir was made out of copper or bronze. It's kanon nechoshes, its base. B'maros hatzovos asher tzovu Pesach moed. These were from the mirrors of these women who, so to speak, lined up in the opening of Ol Moed. So Rashi brings, right, that this was, what were these mirrors? It says that Moshe Rabbeinu initially didn't want to accept these mirrors, right? Because it says Asum Leit Sahara, that he felt that these mirrors women used to adorn themselves in order to draw men's attention. Amalei HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, Kabel, receive them, Elu Chavivin Alai Min HaKol. These are more precious to me than anything else. Shal Yadeim Hemidu Anoshim Tzivos Rabos Mitzrayim. That through these mirrors they brought out the huge army of Am Yisrael that came out of Mitzrayim. Why? It says, when the men were exhausted from slavery, and yageya doesn't just mean physically exhausted, it means emotionally exhausted as well. As we saw in the Gemara, they would bring them food and drink, and they would feed them. And now, notlos hamaros, they brought along these mirrors, and they would hold these mirrors. Kol achas roa atzma im bala b'mara, and she holds it up, so there's her and her husband in the mirror. Mishadaltu bidvarim, and she drew him forth with her word, saying, Ani no'a mimcha, I am more beautiful than you are. And al yidei this, so then this brought them, right, to be able to have the hope and the spirit to have more children in Mitzrayim. Okay, now that seems a little bit strange, right? What's interesting, in the Tanchuma it says that there was a back and forth. She would say, I'm more beautiful than you, and he would say, I'm more beautiful than you, and back and forth. How does it work, and what is the tzidkus in it? Right? It almost sounds like, something has your marriage, lost the spark. Try standing in front of a copper mirror and tell your husband, I'm more pretty than you are. Right? Like you would hope so. You don't see what's there, what's going on. So I believe it can be explained as follows. The word na'eh is an interesting word. Nun aleph hey. In Lashon HaKodesh, we have oftentimes words that seem synonymous, but they never are. Okay? Every word, and there's a famous theory in linguistics, that if you have a society that has multiple words for something, it's a sign that that's very important in the society. I think it was this Noam Chomsky, right? He gave the example of Eskimos have many, many words for snow, right? One is for powdery snow, one is for wet snow, because if you're an Eskimo, snow is like a big deal. That's kind of an essential thing in life. Am Yisrael has, for example, for simcha, so many words, Gila, Ditza, Chedva, Rina, right? All these different things, Simcha, Sason. Obviously, Simcha is very important to us. So we have different words for beauty also that explain different modalities of beauty, right? The most basic would seek to be Yafa. Why didn't she say to her husband, Ani Yafa mimcha? What is Na'eh? So it appears in an interesting place. In Dvarim, Yud Daled Aleph, there's a pasuk. It seems to have 2 parts that are hard to fit together. It starts off, Boni matim la'Hashem Elokechem. You are children to Hashem, your God. Lo tizgodedu, v'lo tikruchu korcha ben einechem lames. Don't cut yourselves and don't tear out your hair in mourning over a dead person. Okay, now, how do those 2 pieces fit together? You are children to Hashem, okay, and then it tells you not to do this cutting and hair tearing, which the Mefarshim say was common in nations around then, that in their mourning, to show their pain, or as an expression of their pain, they used to cut themselves and let blood. They used to tear their hair out. So we'll start with Rashi's Perush, which gets us to the word Noeh. He says, Boni matem l'Hashem Elokechem, you're children of Hashem. Therefore, he says, you're supposed to be No'im. You're supposed to be Noeh. Let's call it for the moment beautiful. V'lo megudodim u'mekurachim. And not cut up and with your hair torn out. Now, it's a little tricky that, because the Isser on the cutting and the hair tearing is only because of mourning. In other words, it's never a good thing to abuse your body, but if a person tears out their hair, sometimes people compulsively pull hair or something like that, you wouldn't be over on notis go to do if it's not because someone close to you died and you're in tsar. So if it's an idea of the appearance of Bonim of Hashem, so it should tell us lots of things. You shouldn't have schmutz on your nose. You should clean your clothes, whatever it should be. So here the word Noeh comes in the following way. The other Perushim on the connection between the two parts of the Pasuk, we have the Ramban and the Ibn Ezra that say these are related to keys of Emunah. The Ramban says that we mourn over people. We mourn, we cry, but we don't believe that they don't exist. He says the crying we do in mourning is like the crying that's done when someone close to you travels far away and they're distant, but we know that they're there. That level of despair in which you're cutting yourself and tearing your hair shows that you've lost that belief in what's called Hasharas HaNefesh, in the eternity, because we're Boni Matem L'Hashem Elokechem. Each of us is a Chelek Elokah Mimal. Our true essence is a godly soul, which is eternal. Okay, that's one. The Ibn Ezra says that it shows that you've forgotten that you're supposed to have a Emunah in Hashem like a child has in the Father, that even if the child doesn't understand what the Father's doing, they know that it's done out of love and it's done for the good. Okay, it's painful, and therefore we mourn. But to reach that level of agony and despair is the cry of someone who feels that the world is meaningless and just all these things happen either out of cruelty or out of whatever it may be. So now we can get to the word Noah. Rav Hirsch, who does a lot of work with words and how they work. So in Tillim, in a couple places, he says the word Noah is translated as, now it's always hard to work with Rav Hirsch because he wrote in German. So you have either the Hebrew translation or the English translation. I looked at both, and it's pretty much the same. It's ra'ui, or what's called fitting. That's what the word Noah means. Kilo Noah, kilo yoeh. It's a type of beauty, In other words, when you're going to try on a dress, if it's 2 sizes too big or 2 sizes too small, you say that's not Noah, doesn't fit, When it fits, then it looks nice. Okay, what's fitting? So what's fitting to a Jew is to have Emunah. What's fitting to a Jew is to have these basics of Emunah, to not be broken, even in the hardest of times. So when the woman held up that mirror and told the husband, Ani na'a mimcha, means I haven't broken. I am still fitting. I am still as a Jew is to be. And therefore she was able to somehow transmit to them as well. And we're going to see how in a couple of minutes.
Yeah, me too. No,
I'm sorry.
Really,
We're going to get happy for Yom. Okay. So
we're normal.
So now let's get back into these Arba Kosos for a second. The Arba Kosos on one hand are Kosos of Geula, of redemption. The four languages, the shonos of Geula that we find in the Torah that Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu to tell Am Yisrael. V'otzeisi, I will take them out. V'itzalti, I will save them. V'ga'alti, I will redeem them. V'lakachti, and I will take them to me. Those are our 4 cups. Now, there's a puzzling halacha. In one of the Perushim it's puzzling. You find in the Mishnah Berurah in Hilchos Pesach, it is preferable to have red wine. Okay, again, it's different parameters. People can ask their shilas if they dafka love white wine or etc. They also point out that if you're in a country with blood libels, lay off the red wine, use white. That's so why red wine? 2 reasons. One is that there's a pasuk al tera yayin ki yis adam. Don't look at wine because it's red. In other words, don't be tempted to drink too much wine because of its beautiful redness. Okay, so that shows that it's a mila, it's a good attribute of wine, the redness. It does look pretty if you have crystal glasses and red wine, it looks nice. The other is Zecher L'Dam Tinokos Sheshochat Paro Mitzrayim, in memory of the blood of the children that Paro slaughtered in Egypt. Now, I'd seen that view, and at one point I actually paid attention to what I was reading. I was like, what? Right? In other words, again, we have in the Pesach, in the Seder, different things remembering different parts of Mitzrayim. We have things remembering the suffering, like Moror. Okay? The 4 cups are not Moror. Right? Those are like we said, right? For those who do the leaning, so you lean with that. That always shows the things we're doing because of freedom. Right? So, blood? I'm supposed to look at that cup and remember the blood of the children that were killed. How does it go together? We add to this the following. The Maharal says, okay, and I'm going to tread carefully here, and I'll try to be politically correct, as you'll see. He says that the 3 matzahs that we have at the Leil HaSeder are connected the 3 avos, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. The 4 kosos that we have are connected the 4 imams, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah. Why divide it up like that? He says that the property of grain, right, matzahs which are made out of grain, is that it gives the power of intellect, of seichel. Okay, that's how Chazal identify when a child reaches a certain level of intellect. It says when the child can actually eat a kazayas of grain. Okay, that means the child is matured. It's now eating real food. Again, he can't get his driver's license yet, but it's a certain stage which is there. Wine, right, he says, is something which enhances the regesh. Regesh is a hard word to translate. It's not just emotion, it's sensitivity, right? Because l'hargish almost means to feel physically, but this is talking about feeling with a different sense, emotional sensitivity. Okay, so he says men are governed, or so to speak, motivated more by seichel. That doesn't mean that men are smarter than women all the time, as my wife will tell you clearly, right? And regesh doesn't mean that women are emotional crybaby babies or that men are emotionless robots, but it means the advantage, the extra power that they have, this sense, is what's called regesh. Now, it's interesting that those 4 cups, which also recollect the blood of children that were killed, should be in something that corresponds to women, because it would look to us that women should be broken far more easily than men. First of all, if you tell me I have one person motivated by intellect, one person motivated by regesh, in difficult times, who breaks first? We would think that person of regesh, of emotion and feeling. That isn't what happened. Okay, it's what happened was that the women were stronger than the men and actually strengthened the men. Why is this? So Rav Moshe Wolfson explains this very beautifully. He says, he brings this Maharal, and he says you have to realize that there are different aspects of Geula, certainly some which are in terms of the intellect. In other words, Judaism always is based on knowledge, right? We just don't have a fluffy faith that comes, like the Kuzri explains there, that everything we have is based on real experiences that we went through as a huge nation and that were written down and that were transmitted. On the basis of that knowledge comes Emunah. Emunah is when times are dark. We say Emunoscha ba'leilos. Agid baboker chasdecha. In the morning we talk about your chesed. Emunah at night. Emunah means like emun. I trust, I rely on someone based on knowledge that I have, but right now I can't rely on knowledge. I have to rely on emunah. I have this. Now he says that the strength of Am Yisrael's hope and bitachon for Geula is based in the regesh of the heart as opposed to just the intellect. Meaning you're living in a reality that contradicts that intellectual knowledge. Hashem loves Am Yisrael more than anything else. Hashem is in charge of everything in the world. Am Yisrael is chosen children, etc., etc. But you look around, you say, getting killed, we're enslaved, they're killing our children. The intellect doesn't see that, but the regesh and the leiv knows that it's true even despite that. The Kloisenberger Rebbe Zatzal, who went through a lot in the war, he lost his wife and 11 children, and was in the camps for quite a while. So he gave over something, I believe he said he learned it from his mother when he was a child. She said, why do we cover our eyes when we say Shema? It's a strange thing. Imagine someone coming to shul for the first time. Suddenly everybody around you goes like this. Why? So the simple pshat is because Shema Yisrael is something we want to focus on so much, we don't want to be distracted. But he said, what she told him was different. When you look with your flesh and blood eyes in the world, right now you don't see Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. You don't see this unity of everything doing Hashem's will as he wants. We seem to see chaos and pain and things we don't understand. Tzaddik suffering, Russia succeeding. You don't know. She says you must cover your eyes, the physical ones, and look with the eyes of Emunah. That's why we do that at that time. So that is the Kloisenberger Rebbe, Rabbi Kosil Yehuda Halberstam, his name was. So this, therefore, is why the women were stronger, why the women weren't broken. And this repeated itself throughout the Chumash. In other words, if we look at Cheta Egel, which the women did not participate in, and in fact, according to the Medrashim, actively opposed, so there that was also something of despair. They say in the Medrash, how did the Satan get Am Yisrael to fall? He showed them this image of Moshe Rabbeinu dead. And that was it. So the men were broken, said, he's gone, we have to do something. And the women refused. But look, they see with different eyes. The Meraglim, the spies who went to Eretz Yisrael, they went and they said, this place is impossible. There's these supernatural giants who are going to destroy us. The whole place, we can't go. Again, the women weren't convinced by that. They didn't see with those eyes. They saw with those eyes of Emunah. So that is the Schus Noshim Tzidkonias, right, that was able to support Am Yisrael, to keep them and to give the hope to overcome that tremendous challenge of bringing children into a world of suffering and hatred. To be able to go ahead and to do that, even with that. So let's try to take a look maybe at how they were able to transmit that to the men. Okay, it's always a great challenge to transmit things you have clear to men, right? It doesn't quite always work so much. Okay, so it says here, they didn't give them philosophical arguments. They didn't come and give them a drasha and emunah. We see no record of these pep talks. We come and we see that they took care of them physically and emotionally. As they were doing it, they mentioned the fact that they have emunah, right, as an encouragement to them, saying, see, I'm not broken. And that somehow awakened this feeling in the men, because all Jews have emunah, which is based on regesh, both the men and the women. Just the women have it in a way which is perhaps more powerful and more accessible, and therefore they're able to awaken it in the men as well. It has to be from the regesh in the men as well. That's where emunah comes from. So they were able to do this by awakening that which is inside of them. And what's interesting is that they did it by even physical care. Okay, there's a fascinating thing that this was also a story with the Kloisenberger Rebbe. They say after the war, so they opened the gates of the concentration camps, but people wrongly imagined that everything was just hunky-dory. Right? Where do you go? Right? You have no more home. Those who did try to go home were very disappointed to discover Poles in there who wanted to kill them. And people ended up in DP camps, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Jews in displaced person camps. And there was a great Rav who learned in Slobodka, and then he went to Berlin, where he became the Rav of the Rosh Hashiva of the Hildesheimer Seminary. And he was in there were some Jews in Germany who early on were put in certain camps, but then were able to get out. So this was Rabbi Yechiel Yaakov Weinberg. He was known as the Srida Eish, named after his sefer. He eventually got out to Switzerland, and that's where he was during the war. And at the end of the war, someone approached him and they said, you're a great thinker, you're a great orator. These Jews who were in the DP camps, their emunah is broken. Right? They said, we want you to go on a tour of the DP camps and to speak and to be mechazik them, to strengthen them. So he went, but he felt that he wasn't being successful. He spoke and it wasn't going. And then he heard that there was a DP camp where they had started yeshivas and girls' schools, and that Jews were starting to get married, and he was curious to see what's going on there. So he came, and he saw there was a big tent, and he heard noise from in there. And there were a bunch of men sitting around, and they were eating like crackers and sardines, right, that they got from the Joint Distribution Committee. And someone even like said a Dvar Torah or something, and he says, what's this tent? And they said, this is the kosher kitchen. Right? The Kleisberger Rebbe was here in this camp. The food that was distributed wasn't kosher. He wanted to make sure that we would have kosher food. So he set this up for us. He said, where's this Rebbe? They said, he's over in the women's side. So he went over to this women's side of the camp. The Rebbe was sitting with a group of women, and he was having a strange discussion about clothes. He says, okay, so tell me again. Sweaters should be like this, and what colors, and what kind of socks. And he's having this whole discussion. That broke up, and he comes over to the Rebbe. He says, explain to me. He says, I see that things are coming alive here. The Jewish soul's coming alive. What are you doing it with? I see the men have sardines and crackers. That's nice. For some reason you're talking to the women about clothes. He says, yeah. He says, I made a kosher kitchen, right, which is there. Now I'm going on a trip to raise money to buy clothes for the women. He says, I have absolutely no idea, right, about anything about women's clothing. They had to explain to me. He said, you have to learn this from me. He says, when you treat the Jewish body as it should be treated, the Jewish soul comes to life as well. Meaning, guf and nefesh, the body and soul, are so interlinked, we refer to it in the bracha of Asher Yotzar as umafli lasos. This is a wonder that HaKadosh Baruch Hu made, right? The Ramah in Shulchan Aruch says that's the wonder that body and soul are so interlinked to the extent that we can't distinguish between them. It becomes like one entity. So therefore, if it's hard to reach the soul directly sometime, it can be reached through the body, through care, through those things, and can then awaken that. So oftentimes this is part of the world of the Jewish woman as well. Her very first care for a child, for a baby, is not in great discussions of Jewish history or things like that. But as it comes through that caring, which is there, many things come through that and change the very physicality of it into spirituality. That's Rav Chaim Shmulevitz has a famous explanation about this garment that Shmuel Hanavi wore, Me'ilo Shel Shmuel, right? Because it says that when Chana davened for Shmuel, she finally got this baby, and she promised Hashem that when he was 3 years old, she would bring him up to the Mishkan in Shiloh to help Eli and to work. So when she brought him, it says she made for him this little coat out of linen. And then even after Shmuel has passed away, Shaul, in a time of crisis, feels he needs to talk to him, and he goes to a woman who can do these seances, so to speak, which is not something we do at all. And then she says, I see someone. He asks her, what do you see? She says, I see this man wearing this linen garment. And he knew that was Shmuel. Chazal said that that garment grew with him, stayed with him, and remained with him even in that spiritual world. So Chaim Shmulevitz asked, what's with this sweater? In other words, how does it become something eternal like that? He said, because Chana put into that sweater all of her tefillos, all of her hopes, all of her brachos, all of her dreams for that child. And that transforms the physicality of it into spirituality. Okay, and therefore, it can affect people. So perhaps Jews' obsession with food, it does have something deeper behind it, right, when done in the right way. And therefore, there's something legitimate about what it does. Let me explain. In other words, if we ask, first of all, I just want to point out in terms of the Emunah of the women in Mitzrayim, sometimes a person will ask, someone asked me this year, said, it's really great when we tell the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim at the Seder because you had, the Jews came down to Egypt, they got enslaved, then the Egyptians got all these plagues, and we went out and it was great. So he said, yeah, but they were enslaved for 210 years. Weren't there Jews who were like born in Egypt, slaved in Egypt, died in Egypt, without seeing any of the happy ending? Right? There certainly were, right? There were many Jews who were killed in different ways and all these things. So therefore that Emunah has to be even beyond that world of death, right? That's that no'im, right? Bani matem la'Hashem Elokechem lo tisgodedu. That idea that even in depth, we don't entirely get shattered because we know that even death isn't the end of a story for us, right? That's the famous Medrash that says that Haman was happy when his lot came out in the month of Adar because that's the month when Moshe Rabbeinu died. Chazal said, I didn't know the secret that he died on the 7th of Adar, but he was born on the 7th of Adar. So you ask, okay, everyone who dies was born, right? He's still dead. What does that help? Some explain that the idea of dying on your birthday shows a certain completeness to your life. You completed your task. But Tzadok Cohen and others say what Haman didn't understand is that when a Jew dies, a Jew is born. When Moshe Rabbeinu died on the 7th of Adar, he was born. He was simply born into the next stage of his existence. So that world of Emunah that looks at the world with eyes of Emunah knows even that, right? Knows even that aspect of it. The Ashkenazi Loshen in Nichum Avelim, in consoling a mourner, is Hamokom Yanachem Eschem Besof Shar Aveil Tzion Yerushalayim. We use there a very uncommon name for Hashem, Hamokom, the place. The place should console you. Why is Hashem called the place? So it's based on a statement of Chazal that Eina Olam Makom Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The universe is not the place of Hashem. HaKadosh Baruch Hu Makom Shel Olam. Hashem is the place of the world. Maharal explains that the word Makom comes from the word Kiyum, existence. That which gives something its terms of existence is its place. The Makom of a fish is water. That's what gives it its terms of existence. The Makom of the universe is Hashem, because Hashem gives the entire universe its existence. So what consoles the mourner is that even though this person is not here in our corner of existence right now, they're within that Makom, that's Hashem. Okay, that encompasses so much more. So that's how they were able to stand up even in the face of that. Okay, that's part of the picture of the Jewish woman. Vatischak liyom acharon. She can laugh in the face of the last day. That's a tricky thing to do. Right? They tell Rav Yitzchak Hutner's, that's how the Rosh Hashiva Chaim Berlin had a very sharp sense of humor. And they say in his last days, he was in the hospital here in Israel, and he had some Talmidim with him, and the nurse came by, and she asked him, Ha'im noach larav, right? Is the Rav comfortable? So he said to the Talmidim, he said in English, she's asking me about Noach, I'm already on Lech Lech. That's a Vatischak liyom acharon, right? It's the ability to have that right, type of approach as well. So let's get back now to the transmission of Emunah. Sometimes people ask, right, in Kiruv Rechokim, so to speak, Kiruv Krovim, or these terms are always kind of hard. A lot of times you invite people over, Pesach a lot is done, you invite somebody over to the Seder, right, who's not familiar, and you take care of them well, you invite people to a Shabbos meal, and you wine and dine them, and you give them wonderful things, and you inquire as to their welfare, and you really, you do nice things for them. And a lot of times that awakens in them their interest in, wow, I want to be part of this, etc. So a cynical voice can say, isn't that what the cults call love bombing? Right? In other words, you get pulled into a cult and they keep giving you things, telling you how much they love you, telling you you'll be part of us, and all these things, and it draws a person in. So the answer, like with many things in Judaism, is that that's not true because we're not starting from zero. What we're doing is we're awakening something which exists in a person. That kindness, that connection with another Jew, that care, simply awakens that identity. And that identity, as a Jew, is the identity of Emunah, is the identity of Torah, is the identity of all those things. It just has to be awoken. There's a beautiful story that Rabbi Yitzchak Breitowitz tells. Right? If people remember, Rabbi Yitzchak Breitowitz, he's a great Talmud Chacham. He was a Rav of a shul in America and also a professor in law school. And now when he retired, he came here to Torah Sameach, where he's a prolific teacher, and he's the posek for the yeshiva community. So he said he grew up in Connecticut. It was Hartford or West Hartford. And he said when he was little, his parents were not Shomer Shabbos. He said later on they became Shomer Shabbos. They were traditional. And there was one Jewish day school in Hartford. It was an Orthodox day school. And his parents sent him to that Orthodox day school. So it seems clear he was like a bit of a prodigal even when he was little, because he said in the elementary school, they didn't have davening in the school for the little kids. So when he was 8 years old, he says, I want to daven, I want to go. So he went to shul every morning. Right? Shul, he says, the minyan was made up usually by a bunch of kind of older people or whoever had to say Kaddish, and one 8-year-old boy, right, who couldn't count for the minyan. And he would go every day. And the minyan was kind of early. When it finished, he still had time till he would go to school. So what was he going to do? So he hung out in the shul, and they gave him his own key to the shul. An 8-year-old had the key to the shul. Now he said, every year there was a very exciting period of time where Moshe Feinstein Zatzal had a relative in that town in Connecticut. And he would come to spend a week or two of his vacation in Connecticut with this relative.
Sister.
It was his sister who was there. So he would go there, and the way the young Yitzhak Breitowitz got to shul was there was someone with a car, and he would pick up a bunch of the people and bring them to shul. So he got to ride in the car with Moshe. He said, don't get me wrong, it's not like I had Torah discussions with him or anything. He said, I definitely, got a sense of something special watching him and watching what he did, but I never really interacted with him much. He said there was just one event. He said there was one day, we got dropped off, everybody went home after minyan. I was sitting in the shul by myself doing what I was doing, and it started pouring rain outside. I had to go to school. So I stepped outside on the sidewalk, and the car pulled up. The fellow who takes us to shul in the morning pulled up and says, come, I'll take you to school. I was like, what? How, what? He said, Rabbi Feinstein said, it's pouring out there. How's that boy going to get to school? Go pick him up. And he said, that really woke something up inside of him. So again, the cynical voice. If the Catholic priest would have come and picked you up in a limousine, so would you become Catholic? But that's not it. It's not a competition of those things. It woke up something which is there. And that's something that we have to understand in approaching the Seder, and approaching a Seder of all types of people sometimes that we have there, right? The Haggadah does not give us a picture of someone sitting with 4 chachamim around the table, okay? That's not the picture that's given, even if people would like that and think that's what it's supposed to be. So the idea is, in the Seder, to try to wake up, and it is indeed done even with eating and drinking, right? Even with those things. Now, perhaps there's another connection of women to this aspect of the Seder here. Among the Arba Bonim, the 4 sons, that tends to be a part of the Haggadah that amuses people a lot, right? And they, first of all, the Haggadahs with pictures sometimes have interesting pictures as to how they draw the Rasha, which is not really accurate sometimes, because you can't really draw a Rasha by how he looks on the outside, right? You can't. Sometimes people like to sit classifying the crowd. Okay, I'm the Chacham, she's a Sheina Rishol, this one's a Tam, and you work it all out. But there's one which is very confusing. That's the She'eno Yadei Lishol, the one who does not know how to ask. Okay, a lot of Haggadahs draw this, most commonly it's like a little baby, right? Or someone who seems to be mentally incapable, like going like this with a big question mark over his head or something, and just doesn't know how to ask. But the riddle is that the pasuk that we use to answer the She'eni Yadei Lishol is the same pasuk we use to answer the Rasha. Okay, that pasuk to the Rasha has this kind of harsh implication, right? It says, "Ba'avur zeh asa Hashem li b'tzeisi mitzrayim." Because of this, Hashem did for me when I left Mitzrayim. So there's what's called a diuk. A diuk is like an inference. Li v'lo lo, to me and not to him. Ilu hayasham lo hayanigal. Meaning, first of all, it's important to realize that statement also has an undercurrent, which is, once you are a Jew, you're never un-Jewish. The fact that I say, had you been back in Mitzrayim, you wouldn't have been able to come out, okay, that was then, right? But that doesn't mean you're not a Jew now. You can never leave the club, even if you want to, okay? So that's there. But it does shock a Jew. What's interesting is it really does sometimes bring it out in a person. If you've been following some of the stories of some of the captives, there's some amazing stories of their connection to Judaism, which is in there, and sometimes it came by just having Islam pushed on them. Like this fellow Keith Siegel said, they kept pushing him Islam, and he started saying Shema Yisrael, which he never did before. Because, again, that's in there. That's another way of waking it up, by telling someone what you're not. right? It's there. Rav Shach gave a very famous and controversial speech many years ago. It's actually studied in history courses sometime through the strangeness of Israeli politics and the multi-party system. It came out years ago that somehow what Rav Shach would instruct the Knesset members who would listen to him was going to determine what the next government's going to be. So everyone was waiting to see which way he was going to go, and it came time he was going to give a big public shir in Bnei Brak. So suddenly Bnei Brak is full of reporters and television crews and all these kind of things. And his speech, part of it, was where he said, I ask my brothers from the left, the kibbutz members, etc., from the Shomer HaTzair, with what are you Jewish? He said, you eat pigs? You eat rabbits? Where is your Judaism? Boom, that was a nuclear bomb that went off. Knesset members telling reporters, I never ate a rabbit in my life. I have no idea what he's talking about, right? And all these things going. And but some people, they said that actually brought a lot of soul searching to some people. That's true. I say I'm a Jew, but what, where, and how does that mean, right? Where is my Judaism? So in certain ways, that's the idea of the She'enu Yodea Lishol. It's not meant to drive him away from the table. That's not what's meant to be done there. But that's the same pasuk we say to the She'enu Yodea Lishol, with a very different introduction. The She'enu Yodea Lishol at Pesachlo. Okay, now suddenly there's a feminine at in there. Okay, some Agadas don't comment on it, but some do. Meaning the She'enu Yodea Lishol needs the feminine approach, so to speak, the approach of the woman, which is there to wake up that Emunah. But then we give the pasuk, Ba'avur zeh asa Hashem li v'lo lo, with that same implication. Who are you saying that to? To a baby? Right, to something. So the Ritva and others of the Rishonim, either brought down in the Haggadah Shlema from Rav Kasher, say you're not doing the words right on a She'enu Yodea Lishol. The word Yodea in Hebrew is a loaded word. It doesn't just mean to know facts intellectually or to have the intellectual ability to ask. Yediyah means connection and care. Okay, the classic example of Adam Yoda es Chava Ishto, right? When Adam was together with his wife, that's called Yediyah, right? To be together, to unite. The She'enu Yodea Lishol is not making trouble at the Seder. He's not the Rasha. He's not poking fun. He's not doing anything. Tell him, here, drink grape juice. Drinks grape juice. Eat matzah. Eat matzah. Eat more. Eat more. Eat matzah and more. Eats matzah and more. He's okay. Any questions? No. When's it over? That's one question, right? He doesn't care. And he says, therefore, this pasuk does have that harsh implication saying, do you think that HaKadosh Baruch Hu did all of this for someone that doesn't even care to figure out what it has to do with him? Or to what's there, who doesn't even want to ask about it? You have to realize these things wouldn't have been done. These miracles we're reading about here, all those things wouldn't have been done. Now, part of it is, why does a person not care? Sometimes a person doesn't care because they feel that they're a failure as a Jew, right? Or that they feel that this story just keeps going on and it's never really ending, right? In other words, we've been eating these crackers for a couple thousand years. It hasn't seemed to have done the trick, right? Or something which is there. Once again, at Pesachlo, the woman steps in with that ability to open up the heart with Emunah, to open up the heart and to say that it is always relevant to the Jewish people, that whatever long journey we're taking, it is always heading toward that positive destination, and that every Jew, no matter what they've done, has inside of themselves that Emunah and that part of it, and their neshama is always going to be part of that journey until the end. Right? That's there's in Shmuel Beis Perek Yud Dalet. There's a whole story with David who had banished Avshalom, or Avshalom ran away, and Yoav ben Tzeruya asked this wise woman from Tekoa to speak to David to convince him to bring Avshalom back. And she used the famous phrase there. It says, "Laman lo yidach mimenu nidach," that no one should be entirely pushed away. Now, Rizal says that that is a principle about every Jewish soul. Eventually, right? And it gets into mystical things of Gilgulim and stuff I don't understand, but he says every Jewish soul is going to reach its tikkun, its part of its place, its connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Every single one. Even the ones that you see, it says in the sources, Ein lo chelek lo mabo, etc., will eventually somehow get there. And this, Rav Wolfson says, it came through this woman in Tekoa, Davka, because that is the feminine approach. They have that ability of Emunah to know, intellectually it seems strange. You're telling me this Jew, right, this chazer-fressing, anti-religious, who knows what, is somehow eventually going to reconnect. The intellect doesn't seem to get it, but the wave of Emunah does. So that is the power of what's there. And when you look at the person that way, and when you care for them that way, so then that can awaken many things. It's interesting, right, that there are different holidays in the Jewish calendar that even the furthest Jews like to participate in. Right? Hanukkah is one. Cynical voices say it's because there's another holiday in December, so suddenly they want to bump up the Jewish one. But when you look at the nature of Hanukkah, you can see perhaps why that also has a lot to do with the Jewish soul. Yom Kippur is one also that in one way or another, it's interesting. I knew a woman, she's now very frum, but she grew up extremely secular in Vaser Tzion, and she said, Yom Kippur for us, she said, we would rent a lot of movies. That was back in the day when we rent movies. We would put down the trisim, the shutters in the house. We would sit there all day eating cereal and watching movies till it was over. Okay? But that meant that they felt Yom Kippur intensely. Right? It was like all around them. Right? It was still there. And Pesach. The Pesach Seder is another one. Virtually every Jew wants to be at some type of Pesach Seder. Right? I spoke to a Chabadnik who was out there in Tibet, and he says, we just put up signs where it's going to be hundreds of Israelis come pouring out from the mountains and all these things, and all over. Sometimes the Seder is very strange. There may be chametz on the table. They may be watching the Ten Commandments on the television, but it's still a Seder, right? They still want to go. There's a very kind of anti-religious school in Tel Aviv, and it's interesting. There's a movement now of the teenagers rebelling by putting on tefillin. It's such a strange thing, right? That's become the teenage rebellion to show the principal, I'm going to put on tefillin. And so the principal, 1 year of this Gymnasia Herzliya, so he said he has a Seder, and he explains to them about the Egyptians and the Jews, and said that now the Israelis are the Egyptians and the Palestinians are the Jews. But it's still what he calls his Pesach Seder, okay? That everyone wants to be there. Because there is that sense, in other words, human beings have instincts, right, that don't go through the brain. If I fall into water, I know I must get up to get air. It's not something like, what should I do? I'm in the water. It doesn't seem to have so much oxygen. Perhaps I should. It goes instinctually. So we all come from Pesach. That is the birth of Am Yisrael. That is our existence of a Jew, right, as a Jew. And every Jew innately knows that. So somehow, instinctively, they have to somehow be there at some point at that Pesach Seder. And then, if you can manage at the time, then it can be awakened. And let's be honest, we all need awakening too, right? It's not just, so to speak, for them. And our Emunah falls asleep very often in so many ways. So that's our job, right? It's not something you can do, right, 10 minutes before the Seder. It's time to start thinking about it beforehand. And perhaps, right, the fact that women have their hands on Pesach so strongly, right, in many ways, both in terms of the cleaning and preparation and all the things, perhaps that does give that touch, right, of the Noshim Tzidkanios to all. The Chasam Sofer writes a tshuva, right, the responsa, each house in tshuva. So he writes in one tshuva, he says, I have to write this without full access to all of my svarim, because the Noshim Tzidkanios, the righteous women, have banished me from my home because of the preparations for Pesach. So I'll write what I can from memory. Right? So that always was there. And it's interesting. It's a pasuk in Micha, in the Navi Micha, it says, He made Tzeschem me'eretz Mitzrayim, as it was in the days when you came out of Mitzrayim, Ar'enu niflos, I will show you wonders in the future when you come out of that last Golus. That means, as it was then, it will be now. If B'schus Noshim Tzidkanios we came out then, we need you to step up again even now to get us out. Have a wonderful Chag Kosher v'Sameach.